What is up, Optimal Health Warriors, and welcome to episode 49 of the Optimal Health Show. Resistant starch, can it help you lose weight overnight? Well, you're about to find out. In this episode, you're going to be learning what is resistant starch, where do you get it from, is it healthy for diabetics, can our bacteria actually benefit from resistant starch, and what is retrograding? Our special guest today is Tim, aka Tater Tot. He's famously known from Free the Animal blog. He became interested in his health in 2010 when he found himself nearly 100 pounds overweight with fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes, gout, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and high triglycerides, all mixed up. Talk about complicated. At the exact same time, though, he discovered paleo/low carb, and it worked wonders for him. However, time passed by and things began to become worse and worse. It kind of, reversed itself. And he's wondering, well, what in the world is going on? And he decided to investigate further in how the human body functions. And he found out, well, we function with our gut bacteria. And that's how he discovered resistant starch. And he found out that it's one of the best prebiotics ever for our gut bacteria. So hopefully today you guys are going to learn amazing things. So without further ado, please sit back and relax and enjoy today's amazing episode with Tim. Hey Tim, how you doing?
Hey, good, Ameer. Glad to be here.
Cool. I'm happy you're here. The reason you're here is I did a podcast with Richard about, I think it was like 2 months ago or something. And the feedback was crazy. We talked about resistant starch, the negatives, the positives, everything about it. So many things. But what was really crazy was the feedback. I had literally, I think over like 60 emails about resistant starch. I'm like, listen, I'm not the expert on resistant starch. This is fairly new to me. And Richard right away reached out to me again and he mentioned you, Tim. And so that's why we're having this today. And I'm just curious, how did you start, or how did you actually become aware of resistant starch in the first place?
Yeah, well, I was like a lot of people, found myself in pretty bad health with metabolic syndrome and all that, and went to a low carb paleo type diet. Lost a lot of weight, got off all my medicine, and pretty much turned my metabolic syndrome around. And then, like a lot of other people, that you get into that trap of low carb eating, where you think low carb got you pretty far, so lower carb is what you really need to progress. And I kept trying that, and like a lot of other people, fell into the same traps of my fasting blood glucose was going up, my sleep wasn't so great, cold hands, and just the same thing that most low carbers fall into after a long period of time and can't figure out why. And and at that point, it's like you keep thinking you still need to be low carb and lower carb. And I mean, toward the end, I was trying the ketogenic approach even, and that was just terrible. I couldn't work out. I was so sore. I'd never experienced muscle soreness like I did when I tried ketogenic, and so I could see that wasn't working for me. And a couple of years back, I found the Perfect Health Diet by Paul Jaminet, and I read that. And so I started adding the safe starches, and gained a little bit of weight, but it wasn't bad because I wasn't overweight or anything. I was just kind of going with it. And all through the book, I kept reading about resistant starch, and Paul made a few mentions of resistant starch in there. So it just got me into the rabbit hole of looking into resistant starch.
So what have you found about resistant starch that kind of made you say, wow?
Well, originally, I'd read everything I could, and I'd find all these different articles about it, just kind of in, New York Times type articles. And the people they would kind of mention a study that was done on pigs or animals or something, and they'd say how all these great things happened to these animals that were fed resistant starch. And the conclusion of the articles would always be, so eat cold rice and cold potato salad. And when you start digging into it, cold rice and cold potato salad don't really provide that much resistant starch. So I started really digging deep and going through the literature and finding some better sources of resistant starch, and like plantains, green bananas, and found ways to deal with rice and potatoes and even beans better to create a lot of resistant starch. But it wasn't until I came across actual raw potato starch, just the kind that you buy in the baking aisle. And that's what they were using in the studies. They were using just raw potato starch or raw cornstarch, some specially made cornstarch. And one day I just saw a bag of this raw potato starch in the store, in the grocery store. And I was like, hey, could that be what, these guys are using in the studies? So I bought a bag of it and brought it home. And, I started asking around and looking on the internet. There's nobody you could turn to ask these questions because nobody knew. And so I just started trying it. I just started looking at the dosage they were using in these studies, which was like 40 grams a day, which I figured was pretty close to 4 tablespoons. So I started adding that, just taking 4 tablespoons a day, and right away got a little bit of grumbly in the stomach, some flatulence, but that went away in a few weeks, and almost immediately I was sleeping better. My fasting blood glucose dropped, and it was like it was living right up to what the studies were saying. And that's when I got a hold of Richard over at Free the Animal, and we started talking about it there, and it really took off from there. So yeah, it's been interesting.
Then what is happening, the underlying mechanism? Like what is, for example, okay, let's clarify something. There's different variants of resistant starch, right? There's like R1, R2, R3, and R4.
Yeah.
And what are we dealing with when we're having, say, cold potatoes or rice, or what you mentioned, the potato starch? What resistant starch is that?
Yeah, in the potato starch, that's resistant starch number 2, which is raw starch granules. And when you take a raw potato, a potato is 20% starch by weight, and the starch that's in that potato is about 70 to 80% resistant starch. So you can easily extract almost 4 tablespoons of starch from 1 pound of potato. It's really easy to do. I've done it a lot of times at home just to see, because I was always afraid too, 4 tablespoons was kind of an unnatural amount, but 4 tablespoons is easily found in a big potato. And, with probably with better extraction means like they do at the processing plant, they get all the starch out of there, but you can easily get it out. And so it's not an unnatural amount. But when you cook the starch, then it gels and turns into readily digestible starch, when you cook that regular potato. So then there's no resistant starch left. But that starch is made up of 2 types of starch, amylopectin and amylose, which are 2 different branches of starch. And as that potato cools down, when it hits about 50 degrees, the amylose starch molecules, they start to line up and they form crystals. And then when they're completely cold, what happens, it's driving the water out, and they form a crystal structure, and that's called resistant starch 3. And that's also, it's a valid type of resistant starch.
Now, is that what it's called, retrogradation or something like that?
Yep, retrograde. Yeah, the process of the moisture coming out and crystallizing, that's known as retrogradation of the starch. And and that forms resistant starch. So like that same potato, like about a third of a pound, just a regular potato, it may have had 40 grams of resistant starch when it was raw. When you cook it and it's hot, now it probably has 0 resistant starch in it, maybe, 1 gram, a half a gram. But as you cool it down, almost toward the freezing point, then it's going to start building that retrograde starch back up. And so that same potato that had 40 grams of RS2 is going to have probably maybe 5 grams of RS3 once it's cooled down. So it's never going to get back up to those high levels as when it was raw. But you cool it down, it gets about 5 grams of the retrograded starch. And then you can heat that back up, and that actually drives more moisture out and forms a little bit tighter bonds of that retrograded starch. And then you cool it, so repeated heating and cooling cycles will actually increase the RS3. And a lot of commercial manufacturers use that trick with starches to create like different types of starches that they can use in baking and stuff like that. But for home purposes, when you cook a potato or rice or beans, then cool it down, that first heating and cooling cycle is where most of the RS3 is formed. So there's no need to go through, elaborate processes of heating and cooling, because after that, you get really diminishing returns.
Then what's going on in our body then when we eat resistant starch?
Okay, it's just about prebiotics. And prebiotics have been studied for a long time. And it's food that gets to your large intestine that your gut bugs can eat. And back when the term prebiotics was coined, like in the 80s, by a guy named Robert Freud. And he did a lot of studies with inulin and oligosaccharides and some other different types of prebiotics. And he was studying them. And problems that he had back then were that people were having a lot of flatulence issues with it. And back then, really the only thing he had to experiment with was extracted inulin. And he never used potato starch in any of his studies. And that kind of came later after his early experiments. But what we're seeing with potato starch is almost exactly what he was seeing with inulin back in the 80s. And we're kind of running into the same problems that he did, because there are a lot of people that can't digest the potato starch, and they're getting flatulence that lasts forever, and they're getting bloated. Some people that have maybe arthritis or autoimmune diseases problems are getting some flare-ups with that when they kind of make a dose with the potato starch. So we're finding that is best, if you include a lot of the other fibers along with the potato starch, because there are some symbiotic mechanisms going on there. And then also the probiotics are probably even more important than the prebiotics, because if you take some potato starch and you don't do well with it, that's indicating that you're missing some crucial gut bugs, and you got some gut problems that you need to work on. So yeah, it's huge. I mean, it's a rabbit hole. We could talk for 3 hours of all the different things that it does, but basically it's feeding your gut bugs, and it's creating short chain fatty acids. It's providing fuel for the cells that line your colons, and it's helping out your immune system. And we could talk about it forever.
Can you explain to our audience what is short chain fatty acids?
Yeah, short chain fatty acids are in the gut. The three main ones are propionate, acetate, and butyrate, and they're byproducts of your gut microbes. And as they eat, the different foods that you give them, they produce these short chain fatty acids. And they all seem to have different metabolic uses in the body, and they go into different pathways. The important because it lowers, it provides fuel for what's called melanocytes that line your colon, and that's their preferred fuel. So when you're eating a lot of resistant starch or prebiotics in general, you get the butyrate, and it sets up a condition in your gut that's favorable for other good gut microbes, and it's also fueling your colonocytes. And in your colon cell walls, there's these kind of organs called Peyer's patches, and they're part of your immune system. And when your colon is flooded with butyrate and the colonocytes are healthy, the Peyer's patches are healthy. There's T cells and B cells in the Peyer's patches. These are all right. And in a colon, like on a standard American diet or a Western diet or ketogenic diet, your colon is kind of starved of all this fuel, and so everything, you get inflammation in the colon, and things just aren't working the way they should. But a colon that's properly fueled really starts to work good, and it works for you.
Now, say men didn't have the ability to create potato starch through processes. You mentioned earlier that plantains are a good source, and you mentioned there's a symbiotic relationship with other fibers. Can you give us a more detailed explanation about that?
Yeah, sure. Potato starch isn't needed at all by anybody. That was just something that we came up with because it was being used in the studies, and I wanted to see if I could recreate the studies by using potato starch as I was digging into the rabbit hole of resistant starch. And it worked really well for me. A lot of people can't stand it. There's some problems with it when they manufacture it. They use sulfur in the process to keep it pure white. Some people are really sensitive to sulfur. There's also, there's people with nightshade intolerances that just aren't going to use potato starch no matter what. That's no problem. There's lots of people who don't use potato starch, but you can still get plenty of resistant starch. One of my favorites is plantains. I buy really big, ugly green plantains, and you can't kill them, you can't eat them, but you can take a knife and slice them in half and get the meat out and keep slicing down so they're about a 1/4 inch thick. And I lay them on a screen and I dry them out, and they turn into like a nice hard saltine cracker. And those plantains are probably way better than potato starch as far as a form of resistant starch, because not only do they have resistant starch, but they have inulin and FOS. They have all three of the prebiotics in there. And then they also have some other good stuff, some micronutrients that's gone with potato starch. So, I'd recommend, and I tell people all the time to eat the dried plantains. Just the trouble is they're not that tasty, And if you take a bite of a raw plantain before it's dry, you'll never try that again because they're really bad. But try it, with the dried plantains, especially right away when you first cut them. They're kind of sweating off some moisture. You can put salt on there, and I mean they're just like saltine crackers. I make a big bag of them at one time and munch on them for weeks. I mean, it's not that much trouble.
Nice. Funny you said that, though. I know in Jamaica, anyone who has like constipation issues or gut issues, they actually feed them raw plantains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Plantains are good. And one thing with the raw starch granules, and this is with the plantain starch, corn starch, rice starch, potato starch, they'll actually attract microbes, and they're used for like in cholera treatment, what they call oral hydration therapies or rehydration therapies. They give them raw starch, and the cholera pathogen that's in their small intestine will leave the small intestine and cling to the raw starch granule and get passed out, and then pushed out of the large intestine through all the diarrhea that's going on, and they get over the cholera way faster. And yeah, it's a good treatment for diarrhea, and yeah, I think it's good for a lot of things like that. People with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. This is just kind of my theory, but I think eating raw starch, the plantains or the raw potato starch, probably helps mop that stuff out of your small intestine along the way.
Probably. Maybe has a connection to do with like the biofilm inside over there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But
Yeah, that's been a lot of people have been talking about that.
yeah, I'm curious. You said earlier that as soon as you started implementing potato starch, that your blood sugar levels are controlled much better. Have you found the connection between consuming potato starch and how does it actually control your blood sugar?
Well, blood sugar is pretty well tied to gut microbes. I mean, there's a big connection with diabetes and gut microbes. And I think when you're on a low carb diet for a long time, your gut microbes start to lack diversity. So the ones that you rely on to help control your blood sugar through whatever mechanism start to get right. And as soon as I think most people, because one thing that was neat about the potato starch is it's a big source of butyrate for your gut bugs. And most people have never had that before. I know I never had. I grew up on the standard American diet, and I did a really bad job of that and let it get way out of hand. And then I went to paleo diet and low carb and lower and lower and lower carb. So, when I first took a few spoonfuls of potato starch, I mean, that stuff was just like instant butyrate in my colon, and it was like, for me, it was lucky for me I had the right gut bugs that were able to eat stuff and turn it into butyrate. I don't know that everybody does. There's some people that are lacking.
There's a funny theory, though, behind that. I have a couple of beefs with the keto world, the paleo world, high carb. My problem with them is most people are black and white. They view either this way or that way, either door A or door B. When I look at nature, I don't care where the hell you're living. There's seasonal changes in the availability of foods.
Yep.
That means sometimes I have more abundance of high carb foods and I eat like a king. Other times I don't. It's simple as that.
Yep.
And this whole idea of all year round eating the same type of food, me personally, I think it's kind of idiotic. I think the more variety that you can implement in your diet, the healthier your gut microbes are.
Yeah. Yep, I agree 100% with that. And I was just telling somebody this morning, when I was a kid growing up on the farm, my grandfather, every spring, the first things that would pop up were dandelions out in the lawn. And he'd go out and pick those and make a big salad of them. And he'd try to get us kids to eat them. And I don't know if you ever eaten dandelion greens, but they're bitter.
They are, yeah.
They don't taste that good. And but he grew up, that was what you did in the spring. And when you look at a list of inulin, dandelions are one of the highest inulin containing plants that there are. So I suppose, there's probably lots of societies and cultures that in the spring of the year, they went out, got all these high inulin plants or whatever, which is good prebiotic, and kind of tuned up their gut bugs in the spring that way. Yeah,
Now,
yeah, I agree with you.
what would be some classic signs and symptoms for somebody that may benefit from resistant starch? Maybe they've tried low carb for X amount of time and they're just not feeling well. Is there any classic signs or symptoms? Because you mentioned that you went through a period that you were trying to lose more weight and you figured that going lower carb would equal out to more weight, but that didn't work out. You know, if someone's listening to this out there that's maybe or is currently in your situation that you were before, are there any signs and symptoms that people can look out for?
Yeah, really just, if somebody has any autoimmune diseases, and I mean, there's a list as long as my arm of what they are, Hashimoto's, diabetes, arthritis. I don't know, there's probably a couple dozen of them at least that are tied to the gut. If you have the autoimmune diseases or any type of gut dysbiosis, if you have chronic diarrhea, constipation, irritable bowel syndrome, GERD, I think you're going to need to work on your gut. Now, whether just starting to take resistant starch is the answer, probably not going to be as simple as that. You need to work on what's in your gut, find out what the real problems are. But if you don't have big overt symptoms of gut problems like that, just for the average person who's kind of maybe like me, turned around metabolic syndrome through diet and exercise, and now you're just kind of languishing. You hit a wall at the gym, and you're not, you're just kind of maintaining. And if you track your blood sugar, if your blood sugar is just kind of in the 110, 120 range, and you're not real happy with that, you're not sleeping too good. Because I know with me, it was really strange. I'd find myself like waking up at 3 in the morning and couldn't figure out why. And that's a common occurrence when you see on the low carb and paleo blogs. It's like people are always asking that they're having trouble sleeping, and you get the cold hands and cold feet, and those type things. Just kind of the common pitfalls of low carb dieting, I guess. And if you start running into those, I think if you're pretty healthy otherwise, you don't have big gut problems, just start eating some resistant starch rich food. You don't have to go straight for the potato starch, but the dried plantains, cooking and cooling your potatoes and rice ahead of time, adding some beans to your diet. I think that goes a long way toward getting your gut healthy again.
It's interesting though, this whole sleep thing you mentioned about people waking up at 3. If you look at traditional Chinese medicine, they say usually 3 a.m. is the liver issues. I've looked over, I don't know, give or take more than 100 ASIs, adrenal stress index profiles, and I've seen an inverted cortisol rhythm on a lot of people who have sleep issues at night. Then you have to wonder, when you have, for example, carbs at dinner time, say resistant starch, maybe some potatoes, maybe plantain or beans, whatever you're having, you have a deeper sleep. The question is why? I've noticed a lot of people on low carb, they may be deficient in potassium, so you get more potassium within the carbs of resistant starch. And I'm trying to figure out what other mechanisms could there be to actually make a deeper sleep?
Yeah, there's been a lot of people getting into that rabbit hole on the different forums and blogs that I go on, and there's actually a lot of smart people trying to figure that exact same thing out. One of them, somebody mentioned recently, I think it was the propionate that's being produced by your gut bugs is used in some of those same pathways that regulate sleep, and but really, I think it's just once your gut microbiome is working right, things just start falling into place for you. The chemicals and the all the nutrients that you need to absorb that you're normally not absorbing good. Like you said, when you eat carbs before dinner, then things are supposed to happen when you're asleep. But if you don't have the right gut microbiome and the gut makeup, then those things maybe just aren't happening right, and you're getting into those cortisol releases at inappropriate times at night, and which also can drive up your fasting blood glucose in the morning. When you check it, it's high, and I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, but there's a lot of people that are really interested in that, because one of the first things that almost everybody said when they started with the resistant starch was that how they slept better and they were having crazy vivid dreams, and and that's just been repeated over and over so many times. So there's got to be something to it. Exactly what it is, I can't tell you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Probably some neurotransmitter connection with the gut bacteria. Other than that, though, I think it just goes back to the original point I was trying to make is I think people are too extremists on different levels, meaning, you're eating this one type of diet for X amount of time for maybe rest of your life, and there's not enough variations. And even within that diet, maybe it's a good diet. It's just you don't there's not enough variety, I think, over here in the West. If we're comparing like what, for example, we had access to as true agriculture, or we had access to a variety of foods, you go to any local like grocery stores, forget farmers market, just grocery stores, broccoli, spinach, leeks. Like it's like four or five choices of some vegetables.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah,
it. That's all you
yeah,
got. I'm like, that's all there is in the world, four or five vegetables.
yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? There's probably hundreds of different vegetables out there and hundreds
Yep.
of different types of fruits out there. And I think the more variations we have in our diet, the healthier we become. And going back to the whole resistance starch, say somebody wants to start playing around with retrograding, what would be the best approach for that?
Well, what I've come up with on that, and I like the retrograded starches, and I figure I can probably get easily 20 grams a day of retrograded starch just from food. What I do is I pre-cook a bunch of potatoes. I'll take about 5 pounds of potatoes, peel them or not, boil them, and then cool them down, put them in Ziploc bags in the refrigerator, and just let them sit there. So I'll do the same thing. I'll make a whole rice cooker full of rice. I'll divide that up into Ziploc bags, put those in the freezer, and same with like I'll take pinto beans, black beans, or red beans. And before I cook them, I like to ferment them. What we do is we cover them with water, set them on the counter at room temperature for about a day and a half, 2 days. They start to bubble up, and that actually that fermentation process does a lot to the beans. It's getting rid of a lot of the anti-nutrients. It's turning soluble fiber into insoluble, releasing some of the resistant starch and all that. It does a lot to them. Makes them. I think I'm not sure how you feel about beans, but it makes the beans pretty healthy. And so I cook up a whole batch of beans, and same thing. I'll put those into Ziploc bags, put them in the freezer. Then now throughout the week, when I want some starch with my meal, I'll just dump out some of the already cooked rice and beans and the potatoes. It's already cooked. It actually makes meal times a lot easier. And you can get, you can get all the resistant starch that you need from eating like that. And then I make the dried plantains, and those are kind of my snacks throughout the day. And yeah, that's plenty. And with the resistant starch, what I like about that, like especially the potato starch, is I keep a jar of it on my counter. In days when you're in a hurry, like maybe you go out to eat dinner at a restaurant, and go out to a restaurant and look at the starch that you get with your meal. I mean, it's pretty crap. You get like a little pile of potatoes cooked in vegetable oil or whatever, or a little thing of rice cooked in vegetable oil, and I just hate eating that. So usually end up when I go out to a restaurant, I'll get like some kind of meat and a big salad and eat it without dressing, and I'm happy with that at a restaurant. But that day I didn't get hardly any starch, so maybe that night I'll have a scoop of potato starch in a cup of yogurt, when I get home, just to kind of keep things normalized there. But
Are you eating resistant starch every single day?
I get it from real food every single day. Yeah, I don't take potato starch every single day. Um, yeah, there's quite a few people that are, and I think there again it kind of goes by how bad your gut is. The people that are working through some gut issues probably want to take some every day, just to make sure that they're getting that 40 grams or so a day that you really need. But once you start evolving into where you can cook your food and get a lot of resistant starch from your food, I don't think you need to supplement with potato starch every day.
I'm curious if we did a test. If we did like a 1 month test where a person goes from a ketogenic diet, that means keto adapted, does resistant starch, but we measure blood ketone levels, hydroxybutyrate in the morning as well as nighttime, and we also take blood glucose levels alongside with it. I'm wondering how that type of combination, more like a low carb ketogenic slash having a little bit resistant starch, I wonder how that would happen or how that would benefit people. It's an interesting mix.
Yeah, yeah, that would be interesting. There's quite a few people doing studies like that right now. Steve Cooksey at the Diabetic Warrior, he's been doing some pretty good tests with resistant starch and measuring his blood glucose. I don't know if you kept up with him, but he's been showing some really good things. He's diabetic and been taking potato starch and then measuring his glucose, and he's finding it's even helping him with insulin sensitivity. Like after he exercises, his glucose returns to normal better. And also Jeff Leach at the American Gut Project, you know him.
Yeah.
He's also running like a year's worth of testing right now, testing his gut microbiome with different diets throughout the year. And we got a bunch of people really badgering him to add some resistant starch to one of his tests. And I did some tests like that on my own about a few months after I started the high resistant starch. I did an American Gut Project sample, and it came back really good. I had really high bifidobacteria counts, which were 13 times what anybody else had. There was like 13% of my total gut microbiome was bifidobacteria. In normal people, it's like 1% or less. Hardly anybody has it, and actually, just yesterday, I did another test, the Metametrics, the GI effect.
GI effects,
Yeah,
comprehensive PCR.
yeah, I
Yeah.
did the 2200 GI effects. I just sent it off today. But for the last couple of weeks, I've been eating every day. I've been supplementing with inulin and potato starch and some arabino. They call it larch AG arabinogalactin. I've been doing some of these real high prebiotic supplements just for the last month, and then I sent off that test. I want to see what it comes back. If it's comparable to just potato starch alone. So yeah, there's a lot of people interested in so many variations of studies that people would be interested in, but probably like what you're saying with the blood glucose testing and all the other like the hunger hormones, GLP-1 and PYY. There's 30 years of studies on that out there. I mean, if you just type in on Google your search terms, you're probably going to find 10 studies that have already been done with resistant starch and those hormones.
It's interesting because, I've been following Kiefer, this guy called, John Kiefer. He does carb backloading, where he talks about the benefits of just having carbs at nighttime opposed to having them during the day. And I'm really, really interested to see how someone would approach that and really quantify it. It's one thing to say, I feel good. That's cool, And obviously, we're all different. We all have different, unique gut microbes. That's why different diets work for different people. Simple as that.
Yep.
Now, to really quantify, to see like, okay, this is a low carb approach, very like anti-inflammatory meal, but at nighttime you're having your RS, like you're going to town, like you're in Las Vegas doing whatever you want, and I'm really curious to see the biomarkers of that individual in a month. That would be something really, really cool to really like witness.
Yep. Yeah. I'd be curious too, and I think probably what you'd find is if you had 100 people doing that, you'd find probably 75% of them would have improved markers. You'd probably find about 25% wouldn't change at all. And you'd probably have a few that maybe had some worse markers. And a lot of that all comes back to the gut biome that they have to begin with.
Now, what's your take on the gut biome? Why do you think most of us are having, compromised gut bacteria? Are most of us born that way, or is it through our lifestyle choices that our gut bacteria is like that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a combination of all those, really. Just the time to live in. I think most babies are born with a pretty good microbiome to begin with, and especially if they're breastfed, they get a good start in life. And then they hit about 3 or 4 years old, and things start to change. By then, they've been through several rounds of antibiotics. Most babies, I know, my son had ear problems from almost the time he was born. And he was allergic to milk, so we raised him on soy formula and had ear infections and antibiotics. Basically from the time he was born till the time he was 6 or 7, he was on antibiotics pretty much all the time. So that just starts a person out on the wrong foot as far as gut bugs are concerned. And then you live in a life where you're eating sterilized vegetables. You get them home, you wash everything. You're use antibacterial hand soap to clean your hands, and you're just disconnected from the normal microbes that man were evolved around. And but I think that gut microbiomes are pretty resilient on their own, and they do tend to bounce back after antibiotics. I've seen some studies where it could take up to 4 years to return to a baseline baseline gut microbiome profile. But yeah, it's just it's everything you mentioned is in there. It's just we're living in tough times for gut bugs right now.
Honestly, to make things simple for most people, I tell them this. This is the formula for success. Number one, get good sleep. Number two, eat seasonally. Eat local, eat seasonally, eat a variety of different foods, and cook your own food. Don't go out there to restaurants, okay? Number three, stop stressing out. People are too anal about small things. The exact gram of food you got to eat, the exact micros, macros and micros. I'm like, listen, we're not robots, chill out, relax, enjoy yourself. And I think we're so consumed with this type of ideology of, paleo diet, keto diet, blah, well, I don't know, whatever diet you're on, and you become this diet. Well, you're not a diet, you're a human being. And if you look at evolution, it's not the survival of the smartest or the strongest. That's not the case. It's the survival of the most adaptable. How do you adapt to your environment? It's simple as that. And if you're not playing that game, well, I'm sorry to say, but bye-bye. That's the name of the game. And I think if more people just sit back, relax, and just really chill out and take it one step at a time, I think more people will see a huge benefit in their life.
Mm-hmm. Yep. But yeah, I agree with all that. I haven't counted calories. I haven't counted carbs or any kind of grams in years. I even stopped weighing myself, and things got a lot easier when you start doing that. And you look at different markers like how you feel when you're exercising, how your pants are fitting, and yeah, I think getting rid of that stress helps a lot. But one thing is, with gut microbes, just eating normally, you kind of tend to neglect them, and you really do need to think a little bit harder about the food that you're giving your gut microbes. And with just a few simple tweaks, like we talked about with the potatoes and rice, cooking them and cooling them ahead of time, making some dried plantains, and maybe even eating a slice of raw potato every once in a while. That provides some food to the gut microbes that they normally wouldn't get. And what's funny on that is the standard Western diet actually provides more food to your gut flora than a low carb or paleo or ketogenic diet does, because they're all eating wheat, and wheat actually has a lot of inulin, and there's resistant starch in that. So it's funny when people switch from the SAD diet to a paleo type diet, they're actually feeding their gut microbes less.
It's interesting. Yeah, they might be feeding it less at the same time, though, eliminating a lot of poisonous foods too. I think.
Oh yeah. I'm not saying it's good. I don't think wheat should be eaten by anybody. But I'm just saying
especially
that,
the wheat today. The wheat today is just horrendous.
yeah, no. I think wheat is just terrible. But it's just funny that that's the main source of gut microbe food in the standard American diet. I'm not saying, yeah, I'm not sticking up for that at all.
I say, pass me the beans and potatoes. I'm good to go. Look at the Irish.
Yeah, yep.
All right, Tim. If you had to summarize, what would be your number one optimal health tip that you can give somebody? If you had to just summarize everything you know right now, and you're like literally 30 seconds.
Yeah, give a lot of thought to your gut bugs. We evolved with them for over, millions and millions of years. They were there for us. And then it was just kind of during the last 10,000 years, we started neglecting them. Our diet changed, and we got away from, eating dirt and playing in the dirt. And we're living too much of a sterilized life. So you're going to have to start feeding your gut bugs the food that they were evolved to eat. And a few minor tweaks in your food, you can do that. And if you need some potato starch to supplement, that's always available. And there's some good probiotics on the market to even help things along there too.
Sweet. Where can people find more information about you?
Mostly I've been working with Richard Nicolai on Free the Animal, and then also on Animal Farm with Dr. BG. She's been instrumental in all this. So on her blog and on Richard's blog, there's a lot written on resistant starch and probiotics and gut microbes and all that. But yeah, just the whole thing has kind of evolved away from RS to the whole gut health thing. Our RS was just a beginning for us, and once we saw that it did have a big impact on gut health, we've kind of evolved our thinking away from just RS into the whole gut health arena.
Awesome. Well, Tim, thank you so much for coming on the Optimal Health Show. I know we're going to have a lot of questions after this show, so probably going to have round 3. Maybe you and Richard can come on. We can do a melee. Till then, my friend, have an amazing day.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me.
All right.